You're listening to the Ikigai's podcast, where we explore the Japanese concept of Ikigai and search for ways to live a more productive and fulfilling life.
Hello and welcome to the Guys podcast. I am Nevin,
And I'm Brett.
and today we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Phyllis Leavitt. She's a graduate of Antioch University. She has a master's in psychology and counseling, and she's been a practicing psychotherapist for over 30 years, helping people navigate the psychology of the damaging world that we live in. She is the author of 2 books, including A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, and will soon be publishing her 3rd book. And we are very happy to talk to her today about all kinds of things. So thank you, Phyllis, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure and an honor to talk with both of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. So, I guess to start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career up until now and kind of how you got to where you are.
Well, as you said, I've been a psychotherapist for all of my career life, and am mostly retired now and focused on writing. But to go back to the beginning of how that journey began, I didn't even know about psychotherapy when I grew up. Nobody talked about psychology or the world of like how we work on a psychological level. And what basically my story is that very, very early in life, I think pre-verbally, I was abused, and all of those memories were repressed. And I just grew up with this kind of dark cloud over me, and I had no idea what it was. And I just thought that I was a misfit or that there was something terribly wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was. And there was no language for that. There was no one to talk to about it. I didn't even have words for that. And I ended up, the '60s for me were a time in our country were a time of a lot of spiritual seeking, and I ended up joining a Gurdjieff group. Sort of my striving to heal myself took a spiritual turn, and I was in a Gurdjieff group for a long time, and it was good. There were some really good things that I learned by some of that methodology, although for me it really didn't really I don't think it really worked. Or I wasn't ready for it, or it wasn't ready for me. And what I realized, so the teacher that we had in that group was a student of Gurdjieff, and then when he died, a man named Swami Muktananda started an ashram not too far from where I lived. I lived in Warwick, New York, and there was an ashram that started in South Fallsburg, and a lot of people migrated from the Gurdjieff group to Swami Muktananda, and I kind of tagged along and not knowing what I was doing. Um, and let me back up to say that scattered throughout my life before that time, I had some dramatic experiences of a breakthrough to a very spiritual realm that I didn't know what that was either, because we had no language for that. But I definitely had a very strong connection to the earth at one point, where I actually heard the earth talking to me about kind of the laws governing our human consciousness. And that was when I was in my early 20s, and I spent a summer in Arizona. And I had another profound experience of the earth kind of lifting its veil, and me seeing myself as just another, it's really hard to describe, like swimming in the ocean of earth life, and not as Phyllis. And it's impossible to describe these experiences, but they were breakthrough into another realm of consciousness, and they were always followed by profound grief at how I felt so trapped in the pain that I was living in and had no way to get out of, and didn't know what it was. And so that's kind of what motivated all of my spiritual seeking. And at some point, when I was involved with the ashram of Swami Muktananda, and I loved some of that. I loved the chanting, um, and I loved the meditation. But again, I would always come back to this very, very dark place. And I had an awakening kind of moment where I realized that so many of us, but I'll speak for myself, I wanted to be loved by God, because I didn't feel loved by people. And at that moment, I realized that I needed to do something else. And I went to therapy. And some of the people around me were starting to go to therapists. And so that was, that had entered my world. And that was the first time I had any understanding that our conditioning has everything to do with how we feel about ourselves. And the choices we make, and the coping mechanisms we employ, and the beliefs we hold, and the way we relate to ourselves and other people. And that was a revelation for me, and very eye opening. And out of that, I decided to become a psychotherapist. My experience, even with just the beginning of therapy, was profound. And then I began several years of beginning to uncover the memories of what had happened to me. And there were a number of very traumatic, abusive experiences that I had, not just as an infant, but older. And they just all began to come to the surface. And it was a really very painful, very dark time. Um, but it was where I wanted to go. Had been a mystery to myself, and I wanted to uncover what the mystery of me was. And that was just a driving force, whether it was always conscious or unconscious, it drove me. And then in the middle of that process, when I was really at a very, very dark time, and I always kept a journal, and then I'll backtrack here for just a minute. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. When I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I loved writing. I loved reading. I loved thinking. I loved ideas. Um, and my actual, I forgot to say this, but my first actual real spiritual connection came when I wrote a poem when I was 13 years old. And like all the darkness lifted, and I connected to some source of divine love. And so I knew that writing was my path, but I really didn't know how to make that experience happen again. So there are all these pieces, there's just all these different pieces. And it actually was in writing in my journal that I began to have memories, like something came through when I was writing. And then, um, you want to stop me, or you want me to say a little more?
Well, I do have a question. Just to go back to your experiences that you had, where you felt that presence and your connection to the earth around that time in your life. You said you were in your 20s at the time, your early
Yeah,
20s.
when I first had that, yeah.
Okay, was there a sort of, were you practicing certain meditation? Were there things that you were doing in your life that kind of ignited that, you would say, looking back, that helped bring that about? Or was it just kind of some sudden thing that came to you? Or was there anything that it revolved around your life at the time that you would say that helped bring that about? Kind of like the poem that you just
Yeah,
mentioned.
no, I don't think there was a practice that I was doing, or a belief or system that I was following, but I had, and when I look back, I feel like I was guided to certain experiences. So I grew up in New Jersey on the East Coast, in kind of that very intellectual, uh, success driven East Coast mentality. That's what I grew up in. And I ended up in Arizona for the summer, working with Native American children from the Wallapai tribe. And when I got to Arizona, I think I started having past life memories, because I felt like I had come home. And it was actually an ecstatic experience for me being in the desert. And that opened up this communication with the earth, which I felt like I had had in some previous life. But again, nobody was talking about this stuff back then. So it was just my own little world, of this incredible communication that didn't fit with the rest of my life. And so, my life has been sort of a process of putting these very odd pieces together, that don't appear to be together, but they actually are all of one sort of fabric. So that's how that happened. Um,
In reality, we all have a connection to Gaia and Mother Earth because that is where we all came from,
right?
and we've lost that connection, and that is one of the biggest things I think that's driving our species probably to
Yeah,
extinction,
yeah,
unfortunately, is because we've gone so far from that connection to Earth and living in harmony with nature. And the long after the apocalypse comes, the Native Americans and the tribal peoples, they'll be the ones that are still around because they know how to live in one with
Yeah,
nature.
I agree with you. I mean, and so I think, and I don't think I'm alone. I have my unique experiences, but I think people all over the world are having connections that they didn't plan on having or know they would have, that are profound. I mean, I think there's an awakening happening, and I'm just one individual that was blessed with some, experiences that I never knew to even ask for.
Well, I think and it's also one, I think a gift to have that experience and be open to it, but then also another to take it to a level of sharing it with the world because
Yeah,
I think it's really easy for somebody who maybe has potentially had a profound experience to dismiss it right away
right,
and just be like, well, that's crazy or not normal,
right.
therefore it's not real or not worth my time to even explore. But to like you were saying about how it's happening more frequently. And I don't know, me personally too have had an experience with the only thing I can call it is like some divine
Right,
source that is connected to
right.
me. And I gotta be honest, like when I had this experience, I felt really alone because, or more alone than I would otherwise, because I was like, am I, is anyone else having this
Right,
experience too? It's like I was kind of hesitant to even tell anybody
right.
about it. But like our conversation now, and just like you were saying, more people are maybe they've always had these experiences. It just there hasn't been the platform to share them,
Mhm,
or it's been stigmatized, so they don't share.
mhm.
But just the fact that we're talking about it now is really encouraging and I think
Oh,
helpful for
I
us all.
agree totally. And so where we left off was when I was writing in my journal while I was processing a lot of trauma. And then suddenly one day, literally, this divine voice started talking to me about what my soul was doing here in the form of Phyllis. And then that kind of morphed almost immediately into what all our souls are doing here, what the human race is about, what our journey is about, and what we're working on. And so I wanted to relate to what you just said because when that first started happening to me, as incredible as it was, I mean, my whole being awakened. I felt warm in my body. I felt connected to love. I felt beyond myself, in a way that I had never experienced. And I felt like I was crazy. And I thought I was going to be burned at the stake. And that's really how intense it was. Like, nobody can know this. I can't tell anyone. Um, Unfortunately, I was working with someone at the time who appreciated what my experience was. So that helped me get through some of the initial fears. But they're still there, to some extent, because, I think that whether it's from a psychological approach or what I, sort of call a spiritual approach, but I really want to say they're one thing, growing and becoming more loving and more connected and more relational and healing our wounds. I don't see that separate from a spiritual journey. Um, and I think that's one of the sad things about our society is that they're so distinct. Religion and mundane life are separated when I don't think they really are intended to be in the higher picture of where we're evolving to.
Absolutely, and you touched on it right there, being afraid you'd get burned at the stake because that's what has happened to
Absolutely.
people who have not believed the right thing in
Yeah.
history. And it's a shame that religion has been this source of divisiveness over centuries and centuries.
Yeah.
Can thank the Catholic Church for a lot of that, slaughtering millions of people back during the Middle Ages. But all religions do it, and it's a shame because when you look at the root message in every single religion across the board, it's all the same. Love is the most important thing in the world, and God is all around us. You are God, that rock is God, that plant is God, that animal is God, every other person is God. And when we can realize that and just treat each other with the respect that we all deserve, like that's what's going to move us forward as a species.
Absolutely. And I think it's becoming more known, and it's certainly the lens that I'm looking through right now, that it's actually a psychological issue that we make it separate. that religion and some spiritual paths have become so judgmental and condemning and ostracizing and even murderous. That's a psychological issue. It's not a spiritual issue any more than I think, and this is also something that I'm talking about in my newer book, um, that the issues that are going on in our country today, the extreme divisiveness, the racial hatred, the intolerance, the withholding of resources, and the economic, exploitation and disparity, and I could go on and on. The investment in weapons of mass destruction, and for sure, these are psychological issues. Mentally healthy people don't rape other people. They don't murder. They don't want war. In all my years of experience as a psychotherapist, there isn't one person who wants more discord in their life, or more hatred, or more fighting, or more, deficits. Everybody comes from some injury to love and wanting a healing to love and belonging on some level and fulfillment. So for me, it's our human relations that need healing, and desperately. And, my prayer is that that could reach some levels of government, because, and I'll just tell you sort of one of the fundamental bases of my new book is that from my experience working with many, hundreds of people and families and individuals over many years, what I see is that so much of government, it operates the way an abusive family operates, with the same dynamics toward millions of people that an abuser operates on in their own family. And when you have people in positions of enormous power over a whole population, I feel like, it's our obligation as anyone who sees it to speak it and to make it, to educate people about what's actually happening to us.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since our quote unquote representatives have worked in our best interest. You know,
Absolutely.
they're all controlled by the corporate people that pay for them to get to where they are, and
Hmm.
we're living in a corporatocracy these
Yeah,
days. It's not a representative government, and greed and money controls the
yeah,
world,
yeah,
sadly. But I think you are right. There is an awakening happening. You know, people are finally starting to wake up to that realization, and I think we're on the right path. And any tools that we have to help people get there, I think is good.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so speaking of your books, can you kind of talk to us like where exactly did this inspiration for your book series come from? What happened? Were you just sitting there and all of a sudden it just beamed into your head, or kind of talk us through how that happened, where it came from?
Well, what happened was that I was writing in my journal, and when this divine presence first came to me, and oh gosh, forget it. um, the sun just wants to be there. I don't know where it's coming from, somewhere else. Um, and all the messages were written. So I had volumes of messages about what we're doing here, and in particular, the laws that govern ego consciousness. That was a lot of what I received. And then I got this huge download about how to work with our chakras, and what the different chakra energies were about, and how to work with them with meditation, and how our chakras relate to our path that our soul incarnated to follow in this lifetime. And so that was just life-changing information for me, life-changing, because one of the things, and you had sort of asked about this, was what it's too involved to like just describe the whole thing, but
Hmm.
what they said is that, and it's a they, the consciousness sort of appears as a they. um, what they said is that we all have all the chakras, obviously, and we're working with all the chakras, but each person has something called a soul triangle, which is a configuration of three chakras. One is they called the chakra of intent, one they called the chakra of force, and one the chakra of manifestation. And that's like a path that follow through all of our lifetimes in terms of the themes that we're working on, and each person has a different one. And so we're all working on different themes that have to do with the whole play of human consciousness on Earth. Um, so just to, that would be a longer discussion, but basically what I understood from what I was told was that my chakra of manifestation was my throat. And that it was, and it was scary for me to have a voice in this lifetime, really scary. And like I said, like it wasn't, I was joking when I said burned at the stake, but actually that's what it felt like. I'm going to be burned at the stake for speaking. Um, so one of the things that I discovered in that was that the things that our souls call us to will put us up against everything that we need to heal. And so there's a call that will sort of walk us through the fire of, where we've been stopped, where we've been blocked, where we've been afraid, where we've been hurt. And that's what my journey has been. Um, so anyway, the messages came in the form of writing. And then at a certain point, I felt like because they were so not just intended for me, and they were talking about the path of humanity and the different parts that we play in this whole human drama, it just seemed it was undeniable that I was meant to share it. That's
Yeah.
pretty much where these books came from. And I have more, these 2 books are just the beginning of those messages. I have a lot, a lot more. So after I finish the book I'm working on, I'm gonna go back to working on that.
Oh, it's fascinating. I have a question for you about your writing
Yeah.
process, or just your your journaling and everything. For one to start, like how long have you been doing that? Your journaling,
I started, I think it was 1994, but it might have been 1995. I can't remember.
and is there what brought you to just to start doing that?
And that was really when I was just in this really dark period of remembering abuse. And I just had so much anxiety and felt so paralyzed by it. And I felt like I'm not getting better and I don't get it. I'm having these memories and I'm not coming out of it the way I see other people do. Like once they sort of deliver up from their unconscious what's been festering in there, that there seems to be a healing that I wasn't having. And so literally I just wrote in my journal one day, I said, God, I just give up. I don't know what else to do. And that's when the writing began. Literally that day, that moment. So, totally unexpected.
Are you still writing to this day? Is stuff
You go
still
ahead.
coming out?
Yeah, not quite as much, because for a number of reasons. One is because I think the initial download of what I got about the laws that govern ego consciousness and then how to work to, bring our soul consciousness actually into our being, that was like a couple of years of like really serious, very ongoing writing. And then I went through a period of trying to share that, and I got very mixed responses. I got some people who were like, "Who do you think you are?" And and I think that's what's in the world, and I wasn't really ready for it. And so it kind of shut me down for quite a while, and I abandoned my writing for several years. And then I came back to it. Um, all right, I've lost the thread of what your question was. Sorry.
It was like, yeah, how is stuff still coming out? Are you
Oh,
still
my spirit.
writing?
Right. So I write periodically, but because I felt like so at one point I kind of was very stuck because I had the idea for the book that I'm writing now for a long time. And I also know there's way more that I want to write from the messages from the divine source that I hear. And I just wasn't doing anything. And so one day I was just chanting and kind of praying and asking for guidance about what I should do. And I got a really clear message to write the book that I'm writing now. And so my focus is really on doing that. So I'm not writing as much, but I do write periodically. Yeah.
Now, your new book. What is your new book about?
So my new book is called America in Therapy, and it's really about how to bring what we know about how to heal human relations to the national scene. Because for me, like I said, what I see going on, especially in the highest places of authority, is abuse dynamics and the extreme partisanship and hatred and intolerance and name calling and the violence that's happening, and the condoning of violence. And, these are all psychological issues. This is what abusive families and abusive people do, and there's a reason why they do it. It's not good and evil. Like, somebody doesn't become a school shooter by accident. There are precedents for what leads a person to be that disconnected from themselves and from humanity and from a sense of belonging or meaning or purpose or love, that they would even want to kill first graders, for instance, or shoot up a subway, or poison the water in Flint. There's a massive psychological disconnect happening in our country, that people are experiencing, and between what we all want for ourselves. Nobody wants a school shooter to come into their kid's classroom, but somehow we condone the use of weapons, and we condone war, and we condone hatred, as national and international policy. And that disconnect I see as a psychological issue. And I have so many things to say about that, so forgive me if if I miss some of them. But one of the first things you do when you go to therapy is you look at your conditioning, you look at your background, you look at the formative experiences that shaped the beliefs and the coping mechanisms that you have. Like, I was such a mystery to myself. When I think I was 20. I was a Vista volunteer in Spanish Harlem. And Vista was like the Peace Corps in the United States. And we were working with mostly a Puerto Rican population of children in Spanish Harlem, very drug infested, rat infested, cockroach infested tenement area of New York City at that time. And I found myself going out with a heroin addict whose father was in the mafia. And I'm sitting there like on this grassy, knoll by the side of a highway, thinking with him, and he didn't hurt me. He wasn't a bad person. Um, Thinking, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And I honestly didn't know. And I thought I was a horrible person, because what was I doing with my life? And how did I end up in such a crazy situation with someone who was like completely out of the world that I grew up in? And I think that's what's happening with our country. People are like, how did we get here? That we're watching the police murder somebody and somebody's filming it. How did we get here? And for me, psychology holds so many answers of how we got here. And it's really, for me right now, it's looking through the lens of abuse and what abuse does to people. And some of the main things that happen when abuse goes unchecked and proliferates is you have a whole population of people who either feel disempowered and powerless to stop it, or you have people who identify with the abuser and they become the abuser.
Hmm.
And so, in any case, none of those people are going to stop abuse in high places. And we have to know this about ourselves. We have to know that as a country, we murdered thousands and thousands of Native American people, that we brought slaves over and we tortured them, and we're still torturing Black people. And that's our history. And I don't think there's healing without uncovering our history and owning it, whether it's the injuries that have been done to us or the injuries that we've inflicted on other people. And so, this movement now to erase history from the history books couldn't be more mentally, unhealthy. So that's a piece of what I'm writing about.
If you had to pick a couple things from the last like 30, 40 years, like as far as societal structures or things that have changed in our society that are leading us down that path or even exacerbating it, what would you say are maybe some of the biggest causes of this issue that we have?
I don't know where abuse starts, because I think it's cyclical. Um, but I do think, like, my family came from Eastern Europe, fleeing the pogroms and poverty and whatever. And no, they never processed any of their trauma, right? Nobody talked about processing trauma. And our country is made up of a lot of people fleeing persecution and poverty. So I think there's a lot of unprocessed trauma in our history, that people have endured and people have inflicted. So it seems to be snowballing in terms of the mass influence of that, maybe because of mass media, for one thing. I mean, I think that's a big factor. I think the breakdown of the family, I think the loss of connectedness, the breakdown of community, the reliance on technology rather than people for our source of connection and communication and nurturance. Technology doesn't nurture people. People nurture people. And then I think COVID on top of that, and the isolation that COVID reinforced and all the controversy over it, instead of coming together and actually working as a united country and as a united world to try to end it. I thought that was our big opportunity. I thought, oh God, there's a crisis now. It's going to bring people together. And it didn't. We just did the same thing that we always do, which is take sides and blame people. And, um, I think the human race lost an enormous opportunity. And it's always here, it's always here.
Well, and yeah, in that regard, I definitely think the government's reaction and mainstream media just, yeah, it forced people to be even more divisive than they were before.
Yeah,
I mean, me and Brett have talked about this in the last episode, I think. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but ever since the pandemic, like family members hate each other, people lost their
yeah,
jobs, like we were torn apart on a societal level because somebody didn't believe the right thing.
right,
And anytime you demonize somebody for not believing what you want them to
right,
believe, that's never going to do good. It's only going to do more
right.
harm.
And unfortunately, I think that there's enough psychological, um, whatever you want to call it, know-how in some of the highest places that they know what they're doing
Mm.
when they foster that kind of divisiveness.
Yeah.
And that's part of abuse. You have more power if you can turn people against each other. Um,
Are there any practices that you would recommend for people to help? I don't know, in their lives, or just certain practices that have helped you, or things that you've recommended to some of your patients, or to help face some of these things that maybe we don't even realize we're repressing, or just to help
well,
us.
I definitely, I don't think psychotherapy is the be all and end all of healing, but I definitely think it's a powerful tool. So, I really encourage people, like, because I think one of the things that we deal with in our society is that we're so focused on escaping pain, getting rid of pain, seeing pain as a liability or as a weakness to acknowledge that you have pain. And one of the beauties of psychotherapy is that it's a safe place to go into your pain and be held and guided, and to have someone rooting for you and helping you to actually get through it and transform it rather than repress it. And so, I think we need a lot of education and encouragement as a society to just face our pain. There's gold underneath. You know, I wouldn't have reached any of the places that I was blessed to reach had I not had some support to go into the darkest places of my own pain. Um, and so I think we need to offer that to one another. Like, instead of, calling people wusses or whatever, um, or saying buck up or be strong, I think it takes enormous strength to face our pain. And I think that's what our country needs, as well as us for individuals. For myself, I learned certain meditative techniques with the chakras, but there's lots of different meditations. I think meditation and mindfulness are incredible tools for whatever draws people to sort of come back to the center and find a place of centeredness to operate from. Um, and the other thing I would just say is, like if you feel called to something, do it. Because I think our souls all have a part they want to play in the evolution of human consciousness. And they're calling to us to play those parts. And so for me, like, speaking is not my most comfortable thing to do. Like, I have a big part of me that just wants to hide, but my soul doesn't want me to do that. And so, I've learned to listen the very best I can, and that's actually a spiritual practice for me.
Thank you for sharing. In our show, I'm definitely a major proponent of
Mhm.
journaling or just writing as a form of therapy or just even self-expression because in my mind it's a safe space like you were talking about where you can share your
Yeah.
feelings and your opinions and your just how you're feeling and have it be a judgment-free zone. But equally so over time it's developed into like I feel like eventually I get this connection and my pronoun changes from I to we, which is interesting. I can sense when
Yeah,
it's there, and then it just starts like almost feel like I'm getting downloaded
yeah.
information. It writes through me, which is fascinating. But at the same time, it's like that is my path,
Mhm.
or that's what I connect with.
Right,
But it doesn't mean that that has to be for everyone.
right.
There can be any form of self expression. I love that.
Yeah, because I think we really all have different parts in the play. And one of the sad parts of our ego consciousness is that there's such a drive to conformity when we really want to express our individuality. And I think the challenge for us is to express our individuality and have our uniqueness within a context of what's in the well-being of the collective. So to hold those two things, but not with conformity or forced anything. And one of the things that, I was told very early on in the messages that I got is that we have all had parts to play in the playing out of ego consciousness, all the ways that we've interacted that have been, projecting onto each other and receiving those projections and acting out and developing, our creativity and having wars and, the sublime and the really destructive has all been part of what ego consciousness has been doing. And we all have a specific part in the awakening. Each soul has a specific part to play. And that's why I think that listening so deeply to what we're really called to is the very best thing we can all do in whatever path, whether it's spiritual or psychological or in service or in art. Follow it.
Yeah, I was reading over your blog posts, and there's this quote that stood out to me. It's from one of your books, and you say, "The more you understand the laws of your universe, the more you will be able to become a conscious participant in your return to oneness."
Mm,
And I mean, that's it right there. The more we can connect with ourselves and find our true purpose in life, and we're all pursuing the things that we love, and we're all working towards this greater goal as a planet,
yes.
then we will truly transcend this nonsense that we're living in right now and be able to grow as a species. I
Yeah.
mean, I've for many years I've always said, like, imagine if even the last 100 years, if we could take all
Hmm.
the energy that we put in to war and death and all the negativity and had actually channeled all of our energy over the last 100 years, because over the last 100 years, there was a massive, massive burst of growth in our
Right.
society. Industrial revolution, technology, computers, everything that's
Right.
happened. If all of that energy and money and effort was put towards positive things, we would probably be living in a utopia right now. There would be no hunger. There would be no disadvantage. There would be no inequality. We'd probably be living in space at this point. Like, who knows where
Right.
we would be at this point in our lives?
I say exactly the same thing, exactly that in the book that I'm writing now. Exactly that. Because I think that's it. I think, we have enormous potential for incredible creativity and healing in human relations. And we have enormous potential for destruction. And we're really at a place where I think we have to choose.
Yeah. I think it all starts, and you touched on it earlier, with getting away from family connectiveness, and we live in this society now where both parents have to work a job just to be able to support. You're struggling day in, day out. Like, children are either being raised by the television or by the iPad or the computer, or they're at some daycare center where the people really don't care about them. They're
Right.
not even paying attention to them half the time. Maybe they're even abusing them, who knows?
Right.
And that return to just being raised in a loving environment and where you're taught to respect and be kind and take care of one another, I think is where it all really has to start.
I think that's absolutely true. And that really is the foundation of psychology, that the greatest hurt comes from a lack of bonding, violence, and a lack of love and a lack of belonging in human relations. And it has to be healed in human relations. It's not going to be healed by a TV set. It's not.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen.
Phyllis, I was wondering if you could touch on the path of supreme surrender and what that entails and what that is.
Yeah, I mean that was the sort of the beginning of what I was taught about meditation, and basically what that was it was called surrender to what is. And you've probably heard this definition maybe in other ways, but the way that it was new for me when I heard it, and it was sort of a new formulation. It was like it was surrender to what is, all of what is. This is what is. What I'm feeling is what is. What's happening in the world is what is. What happened yesterday is, it's just what is, but it's not passivity. It's not like, okay, that's the way it is, or I'm resigned, or there's nothing I can do. It's like, I say this because this was the meditation that I learned, and I'll tell you in a minute if you want to know. Um, it's surrender to what is and then respond to it from your soul. So, what does my soul want to do here with what is? What is there for me to learn? What is there for me to transform? What obstacle am I moving through? And one of the things that they said is everything is your teacher. You can see everything as good or bad, or you can see it as your teacher. So, if everything is my teacher, if war is my teacher, if hatred is my teacher, if, these beautiful things that are happening with restorative justice are my teacher, um, if your show is my teacher, what am I learning from that? And that's what supreme surrender is about. What does my soul want to learn from what's happening, and what does it want to do with it? How am I going to manifest that in the world? For me, it's having my voice, whether it's writing or speaking, and for other people it's something completely different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and it touches in with another quote I saw from your blog. And it says, "Evolution comes about through adaptation to the obstacles to survival." And that is so true. I mean, when you look at
Yeah,
the things that are in your way, those obstacles, those roadblocks,
right.
as something to learn from and grow from, and you're able to move past it and become stronger and better, that's when you're going to evolve and you're going to become a better person.
Absolutely, that's right. Instead of making whatever those obstacles are right or wrong, that's the raw material I'm working with. And I don't know if it was in that blog, but one of the images that came really early on with that definition of evolution was sand and the pearl. The oyster takes that grain of sand that's an irritant under its skin, and it makes a pearl. And what they say is we came here to make pearls out of all the irritations under our skin. And that's the principle of the evolution of our consciousness.
Wow, that's very profound, and we touch on a lot of these topics, but in a different way, and in a way that's kind of like the basis of our show is trying to understand what is at the core of our true authentic self, so we can bring that out and reveal it to the world and be that and live it in our daily
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah.
But and we can, I don't know, I feel like different cultures, different religions, different societal structures can approach it in a different way, but it's all coming down to that same thing, which is what you just mentioned, which
Mm,
I think is amazing. It just reminds me too of like just simply shifting the way we look at a situation, whether it's a good or a bad one,
right.
can really affect us in a positive or get us closer to our authentic self and reveal more about who we truly are, or it can push us, or it can take us away from that if
Right.
we take that aversion, or like we don't like something and so we back away from it, or some sort of coping mechanism that we use so we don't have to face some struggle or issue we're dealing with in our life. is actually, taking us away from who we truly are, because eventually we're going to have to come out and back and face it anyway.
Right,
So one, you're just putting it off, but then also you
right,
might be just being more destructive in the world than you should be otherwise, whether it be
right.
your body or something else.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, it's well, speaking of just the messages that can come, I did have one experience recently when I was meditating, and this being just appeared while I was meditating, and it just briefly said, "Here are 5 rules that you should live by. Everyone should live by," and it just dropped them off and then left. And
Wow.
one, yeah,
Are you gonna
and
share
one
them?
yes. Well, and it's sad because I wrote them down right away, and it's sad that I don't know them per se, but I know one specifically was your contact with this world is your body. So make sure you
Mm,
treat your body with the most
mhm,
respect
mhm.
and live as healthy of a life as possible.
Yeah,
So that just brings me back to that, because the way some people deal with stress is to abuse the body,
right,
and it can lead to things that are more destructive than they should be, and premature death, or who knows what it could
right,
be. But that always has just stuck with me too.
right, and it's so beautiful because yeah, I have similar messages to that too, because our body is actually what holds our consciousness. It's the house that our soul chose to come and live in, so, the better we take care of it, the more our soul has access to manifest through it. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Well, you'll have to
So
share
true.
your 5 messages with me some other time.
Yes, yes.
Many ancient teachings, tell us that our body is a temple and you should respect it as such. So, so Phyllis, what in your new book or outside of your new book, what do you think are some steps that we need to take as a society, at least here in the United States, to right the ship and get us back on
Mhm,
course? What are some things we can do on an individual level, maybe to help push us in that right direction?
mhm. Well, there's a lot of things. One of the things I just want to say is that, it kind of all boils down in one way to do unto others the way you would want them to do unto you. Because if we lived that way, there would be no war. There would be none of the horrible things that we're facing. And of course, that's easy to say and hard to implement. But I think like what some of the big things. So in my book, I really try to look at the microcosm and the macrocosm through the same lens because I think the microcosm is a reflection of the microcosm and vice versa. So I because we're the macrocosm is just made up of individuals, right? So the healthier the individual population, the healthier the likelihood is that those in power could be healthy as well. And the more abuse that's happening on the individual micro level, the more we're prone to empower people that are abusive or not to be able to stop people that are abusive. So I think like in our own lives, really it is partially that, like treating other people the way we want to be treated, whether it's a clerk in a store who's not nice, or somebody pushing ahead of us in front of line, or our partner when we're upset with them. I mean, in the end of my book, I had um, what I call like the one of the formulas is like a commitment to repair. We know how to rupture relationships. We're good at that, right? But the elements of repair are not common speak, and they're
Mhm.
certainly not political speak. War is political speak and more on whatever level. And so some of the elements of repair, and I might not remember them all now, but one of them is nonviolent communication. Whether it's you and me, or we vote for people who are interested in creating peace or who support, a new justice system or more economic equality, or racial equality. But acting those things out in our own lives. So one of them is nonviolent communication and learning those skills and teaching them to our children. Um, One of them is taking personal responsibility. One of the key elements of an abuser is they always blame somebody else for what they did. They're never responsible for the violence they've committed. It's always the fault of the person that they've hurt. So taking personal responsibility is huge. reflecting on ourselves and really doing the work of healing our own wounds is part of that. Making reparation or making amends where it's appropriate. Like, many of us have been hurt by other people, but most of us have also hurt people in some way, So taking the responsibility to actually make amends and make it be part of um, not only our personal lives, but our national life to say we're sorry. We have a lot to be sorry for. We have a lot to be sorry for. And imagine the incredible healing that could take place if, as a country, we could own what we've done to hurt people. It would just be phenomenal. Like, one of the things that I researched just a little bit when I was writing my new book was truth and reconciliation that happened in South Africa. And, that was really, it wasn't perfect, but it was amazing. It was amazing. And if we could even begin to implement some of truth and reconciliation here in our country, we would be so far ahead of where we are. Um, and then, I've probably skipped over a few things, but one of the last one was a commitment to reconnecting. The whole purpose is that we reconnect with each other, that we care about each other, that I feel like you care about me and I care about you. Because the more we reconnect, the less we want to hurt each other.
And like you were saying too about, like, I don't know, there's the societal whole, but then there's also there's like the macro and the micro. Like you got to focus on yourself too and realize, like your part in the play. And like it's almost like the more authentic you can be with yourself, the more of an asset or the more benefit you're gonna provide to the whole.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree. And in all my years as a therapist, it wasn't until the last two presidential elections that I ever had clients coming to therapy traumatized by what's going on in our country. Traumatized, unable to sleep, terrified. So it really speaks to that interconnection between the micro and the macro. We live in a human ecology, not just the natural world, but the whole human interaction and the nature of our society is also the ecology we're living in, and it's not healthy. There's healthy elements and there's diseased organisms in it. And I think psychology is one powerful avenue to healing.
Ah, that's so well said. Thank you for sharing those too, because yeah, just looking at different methods, like what is it, the Hoffman technique or something.
Hmm.
There's several, but um, they all say that though. It's like step one is just taking ownership of whatever situation you're in,
Yeah.
um, and I mean, because that automatically takes this victim mentality off the table and pointing the finger
Right.
outside of yourself,
Right.
and now we can move forward and take responsibility for the actions that we make. And I love what you just said about that. Yes, we can be hurt or we can feel something from what somebody did to us, but we have to remember that we also inflict that, and that we have and that we have affected others.
Right.
I know one thing that really sticks out to me is I'm very very curious and interested in past life or near death experiences.
Uh-huh.
And what a lot of people have shared in their experiences there is when they do leave the body and go to this other place, one of the things in their life review is that they see things from the other person's perspective of how what they did to somebody affected that person, and you
Right.
feel it through them,
Right.
because then you can see how even the smallest thing that you do can affect somebody in a really big way, and you just don't know that we do have an effect in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that we carry some of that with us, unconsciously.
Um, do now you said you're retired now
Yeah.
from therapy.
Yeah. I see just a few clients, but they're just people that I've already been working with. I don't take any new clients.
Okay, because I was gonna ask if, at this point, you're writing the majority of the time. Do you offer any services then, or is there anything in tandem with your writings that you have exercises or anything, or is it are you in the writing mode at this point?
Deeply in the writing process because I'm just about to embark with a new editor on my book. And then hopefully my book will be pretty prepared for publication and for, finding the publisher. But, in the past, I'm not interested in doing a lot more psychotherapy, so I just work with a few people that I feel very committed to. But I have done past life regressions with people, and I enjoy doing that. And I'm open to doing it, but I'm really busy right now. So I might want to wait to offer that service until after I've actually got this book complete. And I'm certainly very open to talking, to giving talks and sharing. So those are probably the two main things. And and nobody really knows about this, but I have done some kind of chakra work with people as well, from what I've learned, and helping people uncover what their soul triangle is to sort of like illuminate what their soul path might be. And again, I really enjoy that work. But I have been pretty busy, so it would be probably on a limited basis that I would do that because those are like, hour and a half, 2 hour sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where can people find your books? Are they available at Amazon? I think I've seen
They're
them
on
there.
Amazon, yeah, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire are both on Amazon, yeah,
Okay.
and I have a website, and it's www.phyllisleavitt.com, and I'm updating that now to put information about my new book on there.
Okay. When will your new book be out?
I don't know, I'm hoping that this 3rd edit will be done, or 3rd revision will be done, probably by April, and then I'm hoping that it will be in a publisher's hands, sometime this year, and then I don't know exactly when it will come out, but I'm hoping soon, really soon.
Does it have a title?
Well, the title is America in Therapy, and
Okay.
I have not, formulated the subtitle yet. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, Phyllis, quick question, for people listening, are there, like, a few, I don't know, suggestions or based off of some of the experiences you've had and information you've been given, whether it be exercises or just some thoughts, some final thoughts about things that could help them be, face maybe the things that they need to face or being more authentic or just some final thoughts for them?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to all the things that we talked about, I would say find like-minded people. Have places where you actually talk about it, because I think there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of like Facebook and all of that stuff, but so much of that is devoted to how you want to appear rather than what's really going on. Um, but it could be on the internet that you find like-minded people. I mean, sometimes they're not in your immediate community, but find people where you can go deep, whether it's a therapist or a community or a meditation group or whatever it is. But start sharing on that level, even with one person, because I know I have that tendency to hold a lot of stuff inside because that's how I felt safe when I grew up. And so I've had to teach myself to talk. Because I think we really need each other. I think we really, really need each other.
We do, and we need to know how to talk to one another and just listen and understand that we're not all the same. We all come from different places, different experiences. We have different beliefs. And, as long as you're not a racist or you want to murder people, like we can have those different experiences and beliefs and still be kind to each other.
Right.
And it reminds me of this story that you were talking about in one of your blog things. You had taken your car to the dealership and you were driving back in a van with this older lady, and you had this great discussion with her,
Right.
and she opened up to you, and you say it was a momentary I was a momentary passenger in a momentary relationship with her, but it wasn't momentary at all. It was timeless. It was
Mhm,
one soul touching another. I was so
mhm,
grateful for her intensity.
mhm,
And that's what we all need to
mhm.
strive for, is just every interaction with every person we have, just absorb that
Yeah,
experience and listen to their past and their problems, and understand why they are the way they are, and be okay with the fact that we are all different and we can all still get along.
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, 100%, 100 million%. That line from Avatar, I see you. I think it's from Avatar, and it's like, that is profound.
Yeah.
That is actually profound. If we all were seen, we would be healed. Honestly, it would be just that. There's so many ways to approach it.
Absolutely. Well, Phyllis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We really enjoyed this discussion and appreciate you being here with us.
Well, I just can't thank you enough. I have loved talking with the two of you. I think you're stellar human beings. I think you're performing an amazing service, and I'm
Well, thank
really
you.
honored to be your guest. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Phyllis. I've learned a lot, and just a lot today is just so encouraging. And for the audience, it's audio only. But if you could see Phyllis's video, she's bathed in light right now, and it's very fitting for our conversation. So, Phyllis, thank you
Oh,
for your time and
so
insight and sharing your experiences and your journey.
thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Well, that is it for today's episode. We will be back again in 2 weeks. As always, this has been the Guys podcast. I'm Nevin,
And I'm Brett.
and we will talk to you next time.